I'm Margaret Sterling, 80 years old, a woman, and my own brother tricked me into funding his luxury vacation and left me behind. It's a sentence that feels both absurd and deeply painful to say, like a line from a cheap paperback novel, not the closing chapter of a life I've tried to live with grace and dignity. But it is my truth now, a truth that settled into the marrow of my bones and forced me to become someone I never thought I'd have to be. For 80 years, I was a sister, a wife, a mother, and a friend. In the end, I had to learn to be a warrior for myself. This story, you see, isn't just about a trip to Hawaii or a spat over money. It's about the slow, creeping erosion of trust that can happen over a lifetime, even within the sacred bonds of family. It's about my brother Edward and the complicated, shadowy space he has occupied in my life since we were children. And it's about my late husband David, a man of such quiet integrity that his absence now feels like a hollow ache in the architecture of my world. David was my compass, and without him, I confess, I lost my way. He always saw Edward with a clarity that my love, my hope, and my sense of familial duty always seemed to blur. Be careful with your heart, Maggie, David used to tell me, his hand covering mine as we sat on the porch swing he built. Especially around your brother. He loves you, I suppose, in his own way, but he loves himself more and he has a knack for confusing the two. I would always wave it away with a soft laugh. Oh, David, that's just Eddie. He's always been a dreamer, a little reckless. But David would just shake his head, his gaze steady. There's a difference between a dreamer and an opportunist, my love. Just be careful. The warnings were there, of course, sprinkled throughout our lives like cautionary signposts I chose to ignore. I remember one Christmas decades ago when our parents were still alive. Edward, then in his late 20s, announced a brilliant, can't-miss business venture. He needed $5,000, a fortune back then, to import artisan leather goods from Italy. He painted such a vivid picture of success, of repaying our parents tenfold, of building an empire. Our father, a practical man, was skeptical, but our mother, much like me, was swayed by his charm. She gave him the money from their savings. The Italian leather goods never materialized. The money was never spoken of again, but its ghost lingered, a silent testament to a broken promise. Edward simply moved on to the next grand idea, leaving the quiet disappointment in his wake. David had watched the whole affair with a grim set to his jaw. He didn't just take their money, Maggie, he'd said to me later that night. He took a piece of their faith. Even as children, the pattern was there. I recall one rainy afternoon, we must have been 8 and 10, playing Monopoly on the living room floor. Edward was losing badly. I had properties, hotels, a neat stack of cash. He, on the other hand, was perpetually landing on my spaces, his pile of money dwindling. He feigned a dramatic sigh and suggested a break for cookies. When we returned, the board was different. A few of my orange property cards were mysteriously in his pile, and a $500 bill had appeared on top of his cash. He insisted it had been like that all along, that I must have been mistaken. He argued with such conviction, with such theatrical indignation, that he actually made me doubt my own memory. I ended up apologizing just to keep the peace. He won the game an hour later, a triumphant smirk on his face. It wasn't about the game, I see now. It was about the win, no matter how it was achieved. His relationship with David was another subtle sign. David was a quiet, unassuming man who built a successful accounting firm through diligence and honesty. He wasn't flashy. He didn't tell grand stories or command a room with a booming laugh like Edward did. And for that, Edward treated him with a faint, almost imperceptible condescension. He'd call him all steady David and clap him on the back a little too hard. He was subtly dismissive of David's achievements, as if a life built on quiet integrity was somehow less valuable than a life built on loud ambition. David never rose to the bait. He saw Edward for exactly what he was, a man deeply insecure in his own skin, forever chasing a reflection of success he could never quite catch. After David passed away 2 years ago, the silence in our home became a physical presence. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound I'd barely noticed for 50 years, now echoed like a countdown. My life, which had been a duet, was now a solo. And in that profound loneliness, I turned to the only close family I had left, my brother. I clung to the idea of him, the idealized version of the big-hearted, charming rogue, not the man David had warned me about. I suppose I needed to believe in something, and a lifetime of hope is a hard hop. Bit to break, I convinced myself that in our golden years, with the follies of youth behind us, we could finally find that simple, uncomplicated bond of our childhood. I wanted to believe that somewhere underneath the bluster and the schemes, my brother was still there. It was that hope, that desperate, lonely hope, that led me to pick up the phone and dial his number with an idea that felt like sunshine breaking through the clouds. An idea that would ultimately lead to the darkest chapter of my life. The idea for the trip began, as most of my sentimental notions do, with a box of old photographs. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of gray, listless day where the past feels more vibrant than the present. I'd pulled a dusty box labeled Summer Vacations 1960-1980 from the top of the hall closet. Inside were faded Kodachrome prints of a life I'd almost forgotten. There was David, impossibly young, grilling burgers at a lakeside cabin. There were my children, sticky with popsicle juice, and there in a surprising number of photos was Edward. Edward with a full head of dark hair teaching my son to skip stones. Edward laughing as he fell out of a canoe. Edward arm in arm with me and our parents on a boardwalk, the salty air almost palpable through the photograph. Looking at those images, a wave of profound nostalgia washed over me. We weren't rich, but we were rich in a way that mattered. We had each other. The rivalry, the small betrayals of our youth seemed to melt away in the warm glow of those memories. All I could see was my brother, my only brother, and a chasm of time that had opened between us. We spoke on holidays, exchanged birthday cards, but the easy camaraderie of those summer days was gone, replaced by a polite distance. Loneliness is a powerful motivator. It can make you do foolish things. It can make you see hope where there is only history. Sitting there in my quiet living room, surrounded by the ghosts of happier times, a plan bloomed in my mind, bold and beautiful. I would take us back, not to that lakeside cabin, but somewhere even better. Somewhere with white sand and water the color of jewels. Hawaii. I had the means. David, my practical, wonderful David, had been a meticulous planner. He had left me more than comfortable with investments and savings that I barely touched. The money sat in accounts, numbers on a screen, a silent testament to a life of hard work. What was it for if not to create one last, brilliant memory? I imagined it all so clearly. Me and Edward and his wife, Sharon, sitting on a lanai, watching the sunset, sipping something fruity with a little umbrella in it. I imagined us laughing, telling old stories, and for a little while feeling like those young people in the photographs again. It felt like the perfect antidote to the silence. With my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, I picked up the phone and dialed his number. Sharon answered on the second ring, her voice as syrupy as ever. "Margaret, what a lovely surprise. To what do we owe the pleasure?" "Hello, Sharon. Is Edward around?" "He's right here, darling, watching his sports program. Eddie, it's your sister." I could hear the muffled sound of the television and Edward's grumbling as he took the phone. "Maggie, how are you?" His voice boomed, full of that familiar, practiced warmth. "I'm well, Eddie. I was just thinking." I took a deep breath, the words feeling momentous. "I was thinking about us, about how long it's been since we've done something together just for fun, and I had an idea. What would you and Sharon say to a trip, all expenses paid, to Hawaii?" There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could picture him perfectly, his eyebrows shooting up, a slow grin spreading across his face. He covered the receiver, but I could still hear his excited, muffled whisper to Sharon. "She wants to take us to Hawaii." He came back on the line, his voice dripping with emotion. "Maggie, I'm speechless. That's the most wonderful idea I've ever heard. Isn't it, Sharon?" He passed the phone to her. "Oh, Margaret, that is just the kindest, most generous thing," Sharon gushed. "We'd be absolutely thrilled, but are you sure it must be terribly expensive?" There it was, the first tiny, almost invisible red flag, the immediate pivot to the cost. I ignored it, swept up in my own fantasy. "Please, don't you worry about that for a second," I said, feeling a surge of magnanimous joy. "This is my treat for my family. I want to do it." "Well, in that case, we would be honored," Sharon said. "Absolutely honored." The conversation that followed was a flurry of logistics. We talked about dates, about islands. Maui seemed the most relaxing, and about the kind of resort we'd like. I told them to look into places to find something truly special. "Spare no expense," I said, the words feeling powerful on my tongue. "Let's make this a try." A P to remember. For the next week, I lived in a state of hopeful bliss. I bought a new sundress and a wide-brimmed hat. I researched luau's and sunset cruises. Every time the phone rang, I hoped it would be Edward or Sharon with an update, with a shared laugh over some ridiculously luxurious hotel they'd found. The silence in my house felt different now. It felt like a temporary quiet, the calm before a joyful storm. I was so caught up in the dream of what could be that I failed to notice the subtle shift in their communications. Their initial gushing excitement was replaced by a more practical tone. They'd call with questions, not about the beautiful scenery, but about the financial arrangements. Maggie, some of these five-star resorts require a significant deposit, Edward said one afternoon. And the flights are booking up fast. Perhaps it would be easier if you transferred the travel budget into a joint account. That way, Sharon and I can handle the bookings directly, seize the good deals as they pop up. It would take the burden off of you. Again, that little voice in my head, the one that sounded so much like David, whispered a warning. A joint account? Why? But Edward was so persuasive, framing it as a way to make things easier for me. He said it would be our Hawaii fund, a shared pot of gold for our grand adventure. He made it sound like a collaboration, a team effort. You'd still be the primary name on the account, of course, he added smoothly. It's just for convenience. And because I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too painful to consider, I agreed. I went to the bank the next day, the same bank where David and I had opened our first savings account 50 years ago. I sat with a young man who couldn't have been more than 25 and opened a new joint savings account. I transferred a sum of money into it that still makes my breath catch in my throat. It was a significant portion of what David had left me. It was the price of my hope. As I signed the paperwork, I felt a flicker of unease, a cold draft in the warm fantasy I had built. But then I pictured the look on Edward's face when we'd step off the plane into the warm, floral-scented air of Maui. I pictured us raising a glass as the sun sank into the Pacific, and I pushed the doubt away. I chose to trust him. It was the last time I would ever make that mistake. The phone call came about a week later. I was in the kitchen, humming to myself as I pruned the African violets David had loved so much. The caller ID showed Edward's name, and I answered with a smile in my voice, expecting to hear that everything was booked. Maggie, he began, and his tone was off. It wasn't excited. It was somber, heavy, with a carefully constructed concern. I'm so glad I caught you. Sharon and I have been running the numbers, looking at everything, and well, we need to talk. My stomach tightened. Is everything all right, Eddie? Well, yes and no, he said with a sigh that seemed to travel through the phone line and suck the air out of my kitchen. It's just, we've had a few unexpected things come up. The roof on the house needs a patch, and our car has been making a terrible noise. It's just one thing after another, you know how it is. I did know life was full of such things. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, I said, my mind already shifting from Hawaiian beaches to leaky roofs. Is it serious? It's manageable, he said quickly, but it's put a bit of a squeeze on our finances. And looking at the cost of this trip, Maggie, it's a fortune. As much as we are dying to go, we feel terribly guilty letting you spend so much, especially when we're a bit strapped ourselves. We were thinking, and please don't be angry, perhaps it would be more sensible to postpone the trip for a little while. Postpone, the word landed like a stone in my gut. All my beautiful, sun-drenched daydreams began to cloud over. Postpone, I repeated, the single word sounding small and fragile. Just for a few months, he added, his voice becoming more animated, more reassuring. Let us get back on our feet. We can go in the spring, maybe. The prices might even be better then. The money is safe in the Hawaii fund just waiting for us. It's the responsible thing to do, don't you think? It just feels wrong to be so extravagant right now. Sharon got on the extension, her voice oozing with sympathy. Margaret, we feel just awful. My heart was so set on it, but Eddie is right. It's a bit too much for us to justify at the moment. We'd be worried about the house the whole time and wouldn't be able to enjoy ourselves. And we want this trip to be perfect for you. They were so convincing. They sounded so practical, so concerned, so responsible. They were using the very language David would have used, and it disarmed me completely. They weren't canceling, they were just being prudent. How could I argue with that? My disappointment was a sharp pang, but at W. as overshadowed by a strange sense of pride. Perhaps David had been wrong. Here was my brother being thoughtful and mature about money. Well, I said slowly, the hope draining out of me. If you think that's best, then of course we can wait. Oh, thank you for understanding, Maggie, Edward said, the relief in his voice palpable. You're the best sister a guy could ask for. We'll make it up to you, I promise. The spring will be here before we know it. After I hung up, the house was silent again, but this time the silence was heavy with disappointment. The sundress went back into the closet. The travel brochures were tucked into a drawer. I tried to tell myself it was for the best, that a few months was nothing. But a small, cold knot of dread had settled in my stomach. It was a feeling I couldn't quite name, the ghost of a suspicion I refused to acknowledge. Weeks turned into a month. I didn't hear much from Edward or Sharon, which I chalked up to them being busy with their house and car troubles. I settled back into my quiet routine, and then came the day the world tilted on its axis. It was a Thursday. I was sitting in my favorite armchair with my iPad, a device my grandchildren had insisted I learn to use. I mostly used it for reading the news and looking at pictures of gardens. On a whim, I opened the social media app I rarely checked. I scrolled idly past pictures of my grandnieces, soccer games, and my cousin's new puppy, and then I saw it. It was a photo posted by one of Sharon's distant relatives, a woman I'd met once at a wedding. The photo was bright, drenched in an almost unnaturally beautiful sunlight. It was a group shot. There, standing on a pristine white sand beach with turquoise water sparkling behind them, was my brother's family, all of them. Edward and Sharon, their two grown children with their spouses, and their five grandchildren. They were all wearing matching Hawaiian shirts and flower leis, their faces beaming with joy. In the corner of the photo, held in my grandnephew's arms, was their new golden retriever puppy, a tiny red lei around its neck. The caption read, "Aloha from the Sterlings in beautiful Maui. So glad we could all be here to celebrate Edward and Sharon's 50th anniversary." I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Maui, the matching shirts, the leis, it wasn't a postponement. It was an exclusion. They hadn't just gone without me. They had used my money, the money I had given them from a place of love and loneliness, to fund a massive family reunion, a celebration I wasn't even told about. Even the dog was there, but I was not. I clicked on the woman's profile. It was public. There was an entire album titled Sterling Anniversary Luau. Photo after photo flooded my screen. There they were at a lavish dinner, raising champagne glasses for a toast. There they were on a catamaran cruise, the wind in their hair. There was Sharon getting a spa treatment, a look of blissful content on her face. There was Edward, beaming, looking younger and more carefree than he had in years. A coldness started in my fingertips and spread through my entire body until I was shivering in my warm living room. Every reassuring word, every concerned sigh from our phone call replayed in my mind, now curdled into a monstrous lie. The leaky roof, the noisy car, the talk of being responsible, it was all a script, a meticulously crafted deception designed to get my money and get me out of the way. I wasn't a cherished sister they wanted to share a memory with. I was a problem to be managed. A bank to be robbed. The iPad slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. I didn't bend to pick it up. I just sat there, staring at the empty space where it had been. The phantom images of my smiling, laughing family burned onto the back of my eyelids. The silence of the house was no longer just quiet. It was the sound of betrayal. It was the sound of my own foolish, trusting heart breaking into a million pieces. The first 24 hours after the discovery were a blur of cold, quiet shock. I didn't cry. I think I was too stunned, too hollowed out for tears. I moved through my house like a ghost, my own home suddenly feeling alien and unfamiliar. I'd walk into the kitchen to make tea, only to stand in the middle of the room for 10 minutes, forgetting what I was doing there. The vibrant images from the photos were on a constant loop in my mind. The turquoise water, the celebratory toast, the dog in its tiny lei. Every detail was a fresh stab of pain. The world seemed to have lost its color. The roses in my garden looked dull, the birdsong outside my window sounded shrill and mocking. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute that it poisoned everything. It wasn't just about the money or the vacation. It was about my entire history with my brother, which I now saw as a long, one-sided story of my own willful blindness. He had never be. The man in my nostalgic photographs. He had always been the boy cheating at Monopoly, the young man swindling his parents. I was the one who kept painting him in a better light, hoping the paint would somehow soak in and change the canvas underneath. By the second day, the shock began to recede, and what rushed in to take its place was a grief so heavy it felt like I was drowning. This was a grief different from the one I felt when David died. That had been the clean, sharp pain of loss. This was a messy, dirty grief, tangled up with humiliation and rage. I felt like a fool. An old, sentimental fool who had been played by the person she should have been able to trust most in the world. I stopped answering the phone. The cheerful greetings of friends or the inquiries of my children from my marriage to David would have been impossible to endure. How could I explain? My brother stole my savings to take his family to Hawaii and didn't invite me. It sounded pathetic. It sounded like something that happened to other people, not to Margaret Sterling, David's competent, respected widow. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on my chest and making it hard to breathe. I didn't eat. The thought of food was repulsive. I slept in fits and starts, waking up with a jolt in the dead of night, the image of their smiling faces flashing in the darkness. During the day, I would just sit in David's old armchair, the one with the worn leather that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco, and I would replay my life. Every instance of Edward's selfishness, every time I'd made an excuse for him, every warning from David that I had brushed aside, it all came back with excruciating clarity. I wasn't just mourning the loss of the trip or the money. I was mourning the loss of my own judgment. I was mourning the version of my brother I had so desperately wanted to exist. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the ornate silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was from my 50th wedding anniversary. I was there beaming next to David. My children and their families were there, and on the end, smiling broadly, were Edward and Sharon. I looked at Edward's face in the photo, searching for a sign, a clue, but there was nothing. Just the charming, confident mask he always wore. With a trembling hand, I picked up the heavy frame. I carried it into the kitchen, slid the photo out, and took a pair of scissors from the utility drawer. Deliberately, carefully, I cut the photograph in half, separating Edward and Sharon from the rest of the family. I looked at their smiling paper faces for a long moment, then I dropped them into the trash can. It was a small, petty act, but it was the only act of power I felt capable of. It didn't make me feel better. It just made me feel empty. The days bled into one another in a gray, featureless landscape of sorrow. The knot of dread that had been in my stomach had grown into a cold, hard stone. I felt old, not just in years but in spirit. I felt used up, discarded, as if my only remaining purpose, to be a source of funds, a well of endless forgiveness, had been fulfilled, and now I was simply irrelevant. This, I thought, is how people disappear. Not with a bang, but with a quiet fading, left alone in their silent houses with nothing but memories that have turned to poison. I thought about calling my own children, the ones I'd had with David. They were good people, kind and caring, but telling them would mean admitting the depth of my own folly. It would mean hearing them say, "Oh, Mom, how could you trust him?" And I knew I couldn't bear their pity. This was a wound that felt intensely private, a shame I had to carry alone. One evening, nearly a week after the discovery, I was sitting in the dark, watching the headlights of passing cars slice across the living room walls. The phone rang. I ignored it as I had been doing. It rang again and again. On the fifth ring, the answering machine picked up. A voice filled the silent room. It wasn't Edward or Sharon. It was a voice I hadn't heard in months, a voice that was as familiar and comforting as David's old armchair. "Margaret, it's Arthur Pembroke. I was just calling to check in. It's been a while. Give me a call when you get a chance, my dear. I hope everything is all right." Arthur, my husband's best friend, a retired lawyer with a mind as sharp as a tack and a heart as loyal as an old dog. He was a link to David, a living piece of my past, of a time when my world made sense. Hearing his voice was like a lighthouse beam cutting through the thickest fog, and for the first time in a week, I felt something other than pain. It was a tiny, flickering ember of something else. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the first spark of a fight I didn't yet know I had in me. I looked at the phone, my hand trembling slightly, and I knew I had to call him back. I couldn't stay in the dark forever. The next morning, at my kitchen table for a full hour, staring at the telephone as if it were a venomous snake. The thought of speaking the words aloud, of giving voice to my humiliation, was terrifying. but the sound of Arthur's steady, kind voice on the answering machine played over and over in my head. He wasn't just any friend, he was Arthur. He had been the best man at my wedding. He had known Edward since he was a boy with skinned knees and a pocket full of stolen marbles. He would not judge me, he would understand. Taking a shaky breath, I dialed his number. He answered immediately. "A Pembroke residence." "Arthur," I said, and my voice broke on his name. "It's Margaret." "Margaret, my dear, I was so worried. I haven't heard from you in an age. Is everything all right? You don't sound like yourself." And just like that, the dam broke. The tears I hadn't been able to shed for a week came in a hot, ragged torrent. I sobbed into the phone, unable to form words, the story of my betrayal stuck in my throat like a shard of glass. Arthur waited patiently on the other end of the line, his silence a comforting presence. He didn't rush me, he just listened to my grief. When I could finally speak, the story tumbled out in a choked, disjointed mess. The Hawaii plan, the postponement, the shared account, the photographs on the internet. I told him everything, my voice thick with shame. When I finished, the silence on the line stretched for a long moment. I braced myself for pity, for a gentle "Oh, Margaret." But that's not what Arthur said. What he said in a voice that was suddenly as cold and hard as steel was, "That absolute, unmitigated son of a bitch." The sheer force of his anger on my behalf was like a physical shock. It was so different from the pity I had dreaded. It was a validation. It was the righteous fury I hadn't allowed myself to feel, and hearing it from him was like a cool cloth on a fevered brow. "I'm so sorry, Arthur," I whispered. "I feel like such an old fool. David always warned me." "Stop that right now," he cut in, his tone sharp but not unkind. "You are not a fool. You are a good and loving sister who wanted to believe the best of her brother. The shame in this situation belongs to one person, and it is not you. David didn't warn you because he thought you were weak, Margaret. He warned you because he knew you were good, and he knew Edward would see your goodness as an opportunity. There is a world of difference." His words were a balm to my wounded spirit. He wasn't just comforting me, he was reframing the narrative. I wasn't a victim of my own foolishness. I was a victim of a calculated, cruel deception. "What do I do, Arthur?" I asked, my voice small. "They have all that money." I heard the sound of him shuffling papers on his desk. "Tell me about this account, Margaret, this Hawaii fund. You said you were the primary account holder." "Well, yes," I said. "Edward said it was just for convenience." A dry, mirthless chuckle came down the line. "Oh, I'm sure he did. His convenience, not yours." Margaret listened to me very carefully. "Being the primary account holder means everything. It means the account is, for all legal purposes, yours. You granted him access. You can just as easily revoke it." A flicker of something power maybe stirred in my chest. "I can." "You absolutely can," he said, his voice now crisp and professional, the retired lawyer in him coming to the forefront. "You can walk into that bank, or more likely, log into your online portal, and you can freeze that account instantly. You can change the password. You can transfer every last penny out of it and put it back where it belongs. He is a signatory, not an owner. He has privileges, not rights. Privileges which, I might add, can be revoked at any time." The idea was so audacious, so contrary to my nature that I couldn't quite process it. I was a peacekeeper, a smoother of ruffled feathers. The thought of such a direct, aggressive confrontation was terrifying. "But there in Hawaii," I stammered, "what would happen?" "What would happen," Arthur said slowly, letting the weight of his words sink in, "is that the credit card they have undoubtedly linked to that account would be declined. The hotel, which is likely billing charges to the room daily, might suddenly demand payment. Their river of your money would dry up in an instant. They would be stranded in their stolen paradise with no way to pay for it." He painted a vivid picture. I imagined the panic on Edward's face, the indignation on Sharon S. The thought sent a jolt of something hot and sharp through me. It wasn't glee, not exactly. It was a feeling of justice. It was the satisfying click of a lock falling into place. "David always said you were the strongest person he knew," Arthur said softly, his tone shifting back to that of a dear friend. "He said you had a spine of steel, you just kept it hidden under a cashmere sweater. He was worried you were too good for a world. That has people like your brother in it, but he never, ever thought you were weak." Hearing him speak of David, of his faith in me, was the final push I needed. My grief, which had been a stagnant pool of sorrow and shame, began to move. It swirled and churned, and from it rose a cold, clear, and quiet resolve. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Revenge was a hot, messy emotion. This was about something cleaner. It was about reclaiming my dignity. It was about honoring my husband's memory by finally becoming the woman he always knew I was. It was about drawing a line in the white sands of Maui, a line that my brother would not be allowed to cross ever again. "All right, Arthur," I said, and my voice was different. The tremble was gone, it was steady, it was calm. "Tell me exactly what I need to do." The conversation with Arthur had flipped a switch inside me. The fog of my grief had burned away, leaving behind the stark, clear landscape of purpose. After we hung up, I didn't hesitate. I walked from the kitchen to the small office David had used, a room I hadn't spent much time in since his passing. It was still his space, organized and immaculate. I sat down in his large leather chair, which sighed under my weight as if it remembered me. I turned on the desktop computer, the hum of the machine a quiet call to action. With Arthur's instructions echoing in my mind, I navigated to the bank's website. My hands were steady as I typed in my username and password. The screen loaded, and there it was, listed under my accounts, Hawaii Fund. The balance was sickeningly large, though thousands of dollars less than what I had initially deposited. I clicked on the transaction history. The screen filled with a litany of my own betrayal. Hawaiian Airlines, $4,875. $4 Seasons Resort Maui deposit $10,000. Aloha Car Rental $1,250. Then came the smaller, more insidious charges. Tommy Bahama $854. Mama's Fish House $632. Maui Dive Shop $450. They weren't just staying there, they were living a fantasy life on my dime. Each line item was a fresh insult. I felt a surge of cold fury, but I pushed it down. This was not the time for emotion. This was the time for precision. I followed Arthur's steps exactly. I found the Account Services tab. I clicked on Manage Account Access. There was Edward's name listed as a signatory with full access. Beside his name was a small, unassuming button, Revoke Access. I stared at it for a long moment. It seemed too simple a tool to undo such a profound betrayal. It was the digital equivalent of turning a key in a lock. With a deep breath, I moved the mouse, centered the pointer over the button, and I clicked. A box popped up. "Are you sure you want to permanently revoke access for Edward Sterling?" I clicked Confirm. Next, I opened a new tab for my primary checking account. I initiated a transfer from Hawaii Fund to M Sterling Checking. For the amount, I entered the entire remaining balance down to the last cent. I hit Submit. The screen refreshed. The Hawaii Fund now had a balance of $0. I leaned back in David's chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was done. The well was dry. It was a quiet, bloodless coup, executed with a few clicks of a mouse from a silent house thousands of miles away. My work wasn't finished. Arthur had told me to be thorough. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the back of the credit card linked to the account. After navigating the automated menu, I spoke to a pleasant young woman named Brenda. "I need to report suspicious activity on my account," I said, my voice even. "And I wish to lower the credit limit on this card to $1 effective immediately." $1? Brenda asked, clearly confused. "Ma'am, your current limit is $50,000. "I am aware," I said calmly. "My financial situation has changed unexpectedly. $1, please." There was a flurry of typing on her end. "Okay, ma'am, that's done. The new limit is now $1. Finally, I looked up the number for the Four Seasons in Maui. I asked to be put through to the billing department. "Hello," I said to the man who answered. "I'm calling about the reservation for Sterling in the oceanfront suite." Yes, how can I help you?" "I am the primary holder of the credit card on file for that room," I said. "I need to inform you that I will not be authorizing any further charges to that card. Not for the room, not for room service, not for the spa, not for anything. The card is no longer valid for their stay." There was a moment of confused silence. "Ma'am, the Sterling party is checked in for another 5 nights." "That is their problem, not mine," I said, and the coldness in my own voice surprised me. I suggest you secure a new form of payment from them immediately. I hung up before he could respond. I sat back, the three-pronged attack complete. The bank account was empty, the credit card was useless, the hotel was alerted. I had built a financial fortress around myself, and they were on the outside, blissfully unaware, soaking up the Hawaiian sun. Now all I had to do was wait. It didn't take long. 2 hours later, as I was watering my parched violets, my cell phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. Text, strange, my card was just declined at the gift shop trying to buy a souvenir for you. Must be a glitch. Can you check the account? It was from Sharon. The casual mention of a souvenir for me was a masterful touch of passive aggression. I read the message, and for the first time in weeks, a small, grim smile touched my lips. I set the phone down and continued watering my plants. An hour later, another buzz, a voicemail this time from Edward. His voice was tight with irritation. Maggie, call me. Sharon's card was declined and now mine is too. We're trying to have dinner. Something's wrong with the bank. Call me back as soon as you get this. I listened to the message and then deleted it. The sun began to set, painting my living room in hues of orange and pink. It was the time of day they'd be sitting on their lanai ordering expensive cocktails. The phone buzzed again, a rapid-fire series of texts. Text from Edward, Maggie, what is going on? The restaurant won't accept our card. Text from Edward, I tried the ATM. It says insufficient funds. Text from Edward, this is not funny. Text from Edward, Margaret, what did you do? Why is everything declined? The final text in all caps was the one I had been waiting for. It was the shriek of a man whose fantasy had just collided with reality. I picked up the phone, my hand steady, my mind clear. The panic was his now. The power was mine. The phone began to ring almost immediately after the last text message arrived. It shrilled through the quiet house, insistent and frantic. I let it ring, counting each one. 1, 2, 3. On the fourth, I calmly picked it up. Hello, Edward, I said, my voice as placid as a summer lake. Margaret, thank God, what in the hell is going on? He sputtered, his voice a frantic jumble of anger and confusion. Everything is being declined. The hotel manager just called the room and said our card is no longer valid. They're threatening to lock us out. Did you cancel the card? What did you do? I let him finish his tirade, listening to the panic that frayed the edges of his voice. I could hear Sharon in the background, her voice a high-pitched whine. Ask her what she did, Eddie, ask her. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke. I didn't cancel the card, Edward. I simply moved my money back into my own account. There was a beat of stunned silence. He couldn't comprehend it. Your money? What are you talking about? That was the Hawaii fund, our money. No, Edward, I said, and my voice was laced with an icy precision I didn't know I possessed. It was never our money. It was my money. Money I gave freely for a trip I believed we were going to take together. A trip you told me we had to postpone. He stammered, caught in the lie. We did postpone it. This was a different thing, a last-minute opportunity for the kids for our anniversary. We were going to plan our trip for the spring just like we said. The lie was so bald, so insulting in its simplicity that I almost laughed. Oh, Edward, please don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else. I saw the pictures, the whole family, the matching shirts, the champagne toasts. Even the dog got an invitation. It was a lovely celebration, I'm sure. You just forgot one small detail. You forgot to tell me and you forgot to pay for it yourself. A different sound entered his voice now, the defensive bluster of a man who's been caught. How could you do this to us, to your own family? We're stranded here. How are we supposed to pay the hotel? How are we supposed to get home? I imagine that is a significant problem for you, I said calmly. You are a resourceful man, Edward. You've always been good at getting what you want. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Perhaps one of your children can help. They seem to be enjoying the fruits of my savings. Maybe they can bear some of the costs. This is cruel, Margaret. This is vindictive. You're trying to ruin us over a simple misunderstanding. He shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. A misunderstanding. I finally allowed the cold anger to seep into my voice. You callously and deliberately deceived me. You preyed on my loneliness and my love for you to steal a substantial amount of money. You left me behind without a second thought, toasting your good fortune while I sat in this silent house, believing your lies. That is not a misunderstanding, Edward. That is a betrayal of the highest order, and it is over. What do you want from me? He pleaded, his tone shifting to begging. Do you want me to apologize? Fine. I'm sorry, okay. Now please turn the card back on. We'll pay you back, I swear. His apology was as hollow as a drum, a desperate gambit to regain control. And I knew with absolute certainty that giving in would mean this cycle would continue for the rest of my life. No, Edward, I said, my voice softening not with pity but with a sad finality. No, this was the last time. David tried to warn me my whole life that your charm was a weapon. I never wanted to believe him. But he was right. You don't see me as a sister. You see me as a resource, and the bank is now closed. I could hear him breathing raggedly on the other end of the line, the silence stretching between Maui and my quiet living room. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the dawning horror of his situation. Goodbye, Edward, I said softly, and I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, the receiver still in my hand. My heart was not pounding. My hands were not shaking. I felt a profound, deep calm. It wasn't the joy of victory. It was the quiet peace of a war finally ended. I picked up my cell phone and opened my banking app. I navigated to the payment screen. I typed in Edward's phone number. For the amount, I entered $1, and in the memo field, I typed a short, simple note. For your ticket home. The rest is for my own postponed plans. Don't contact me again. I pressed send, and with that final, quiet act, I let him go. I let go of the hope, the hurt, the history. I was no longer waiting for my brother to be the man I wanted him to be. I was finally free to be the woman I needed to be for myself. The silence in the house no longer felt lonely. It felt like peace. It felt like my own. For a long time after that day, I waited to feel regret. I waited for the guilt to creep in, for the ingrained habit of forgiveness to bubble to the surface. But it never did. What I found instead was a quiet strength I never knew I had. The lesson I've learned was never about the money. It was about value. I had spent a lifetime letting my brother and others determine my worth, believing my value lay in my generosity, my pliability, my willingness to keep the peace. The ultimate triumph wasn't leaving him stranded in Hawaii. It was realizing that my worth is inherent. It isn't something that can be spent or stolen or given away. It simply is. I've since taken a trip, a wonderful cruise through the Alaskan fjords by myself. And I've learned that while the silence of a house can be lonely, the peace of a life lived on your own terms is a beautiful sound.